All right, well, welcome everybody to today's msexchange.org webinar, another in a series of regular informational webinars hosted by msexchange.org, designed to deliver helpful and timely information to the MS Exchange community. As a trusted resource for Exchange administrators since 1996, msexchange.org delivers unique content created by many of the most respected Exchange experts in the world, and it's home to the largest independent Exchange server community with over 85,000 active registered users. Today's event is sponsored by Sherpa Software. Sherpa Software is a leading provider of cloud and on-premise information management and e-discovery solutions. Sherpa's award-winning software, services, and support have helped more than 3,000 companies worldwide to address email and file management challenges. Attender Online, Sherpa's new SaaS platform, extends information governance capabilities across a wide variety of electronically stored information, including files, email, and SharePoint. Sherpa solutions for archiving, e-discovery, PST management, compliance, and policy enforcement are designed to be practical, reliable, and affordable. My name is Roger, and I'll be the event moderator. Before introducing our presenters, I have a few quick housekeeping items, the first of which is to let you know that we are recording today's event. All participant lines are muted, so if you need any assistance during the event, please use the questions feature at the bottom of the control panel to send a question, and I'll try to help. Please also use that questions panel to submit any questions or comments you have during today's presentations, and we'll try to address as many of them as possible at the end. Our first speaker today is J. Peter Bruzzese. J. Peter is a Microsoft certified trainer who holds multiple MS certifications. He's also a Microsoft Exchange MVP, an internationally published technical author, and a well-known tech speaker and journalist. His work concentration has been and continues to be enterprise environments with a special focus on Active Directory, Exchange, SharePoint, and desktop operating systems. Also joining us today is Rick Wilson. As a solutions architect, Rick advises clients on the use, deployment, and best practice standards for Sherpa's Microsoft Exchange solutions. He works closely with Sherpa's technical team to chart the future course of Sherpa's products, and was one of the principal architects of their SaaS offering, Attender Online. Rick specializes in Microsoft Exchange email management and archiving, PST file administration, content searching, policy enforcement, and professional services. And with that, J. Peter, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started.
Well, thank you, Roger. It is nice to be with you folks today. As mentioned, my name is J. Peter Bruzzese, and I'm a Microsoft Exchange MVP. Now, for those of you who are not aware as far as that designation, it's not something you can take a test to become. It's actually an award that's given to folks like myself who participate in the community and assist others with regard to Microsoft products. So in my case, it's Exchange. There's about 100 of us in the world and only 20 of us in the United States. So what's really exciting is next week we're all heading out to the Microsoft MVP Summit, which will have thousands of MVPs from around the world moving into the Microsoft Redmond area there in Bellevue. So it's nice. It's a nice designation, and it gives me a chance to get some insight from the Exchange team with regard to future developments, especially with regard to things like regulatory compliance and in the case of our discussion today, dealing with the PST nightmare. In addition, I'm co-founder and CIO of Clip Training, and as mentioned, I'm a technical author. My most recent work is actually a book that's been published this month called Mastering Exchange 2013. Just came out. And I'm also the InfoWorld Enterprise Windows columnist, so perhaps you've read my column there. So that's enough about me. Let's jump right into our discussion today, and let's just round up the PST nightmare. For those of you IT admins out there who are Exchange admins, this really is, this is the feeling you get, right? You can relate to this, waking up in the middle of the night sometimes thinking about PST files. Well, hopefully not, hopefully not. But, you know, it does happen that this nightmare has only become really a nightmare in recent years. Wouldn't you say? I mean, think about it. Back in the 90s, late 90s, when I was first working with Exchange with companies like Merrill Lynch or Goldman Sachs, you know, we didn't worry about PSTs. We pretty much worried more about quotas and things like that to keep our mailboxes small. And so that was the concern. But where PSTs became a problem, you know, as folks decided we're going to use PSTs, it became a problem as various things like the Enron scandal, sexual harassment scandals that have hit companies, as these things have become more problematic and we find that there's a greater need for discovery, well, having PSTs just doesn't really work for that. So what do you do now? Your end users are used to using PSTs, but what do you do? Well, let's take it back to the beginning. Let's go back to our discussion of how PSTs form in an organization. You know, because they don't just happen. There's something that drives the PST nightmare. Now, oftentimes, quotas are established. Now, why? Well, because you have a need to keep mailbox sizes down. In many organizations, regardless of how cheap storage is these days, and we all know that it's dramatically cheaper than it was 10 years ago, but regardless, there's still a need to keep mailbox sizes down. Otherwise, folks will just allow them to grow and grow and grow, and that becomes difficult to manage. It's difficult to back up, difficult to recover, difficult to perform other database maintenance tasks. Not to mention the fact that oftentimes you're dealing with your mailbox databases residing on high-performance storage. So what happens? Well, because you have the mailbox databases residing on your high-performance storage, quotas are imposed. Now, if you're saying, wait a minute, J. Peter, hold on a second. With Exchange, starting with Exchange 2007 and 2010 and now with 2013, there's been a big push by Microsoft to go to JBOD, to go to these disk arrays, JBOD arrays, that are not necessarily super expensive. Yes, that's true. But there are a lot of folks out there who are still using high-performance SANs because they bought them back in the early 2000s. These things are still running. They have these high-performance disk systems, and they're still, even if they're not using old equipment, they might even be using newer equipment, but they're still kind of locked in on the old thinking that you need high-performance disk for Exchange. So we're not here to debate that. You know, that's more of a taste great, less filling kind of discussion. The fact is Microsoft has pushed and utilized in their own house. You know, they eat their own dog food. They have pushed the JBOD array as a means to provide good enough performance, great performance, without having to pay for that high-performance price tag. Nevertheless, folks are still using the high-performance storage, and so what happens? Quotas are imposed. What happens next? Users, rather than delete, you know, they're like children sometimes. You can tell them to start cleaning things up, but they don't do it. What do? They move their data to PSTs. Now, you might say, wait a minute, J. Peter, we can't stop them from doing that. Actually, you can. You can stop them through group policy settings. You can also stop them through giving them alternatives, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit as far as the use of either the personal archive that Microsoft provides in Exchange or going with an enterprise-grade archive. So, all right, users move things to PSTs. PSTs, as we all know, are very difficult to deal with for discovery. They're nearly impossible. They're only accessible from the system where they reside, so the end user can only get to them from there. And PSTs basically, they make it so that it's almost impossible to discover data, or it becomes a very costly nightmare. Now, here's the honest fact. You might say, well, look, you know what? We can just make it so that end users don't establish PSTs. They deal with the quota, and that's it. But there are legitimate business or personal reasons why an end user might want to retain messages beyond the quota limit. Isn't that true? So, you know, we understand that there are, you know, reasons for that. So many will use PSTs to accomplish this. But it's important that we understand where the problem is with PSTs. For one thing, they are unmanaged, right? PSTs are created by users. They reside on computers or network shares. They're not managed by the organization. Problem number one. Number two, there's an increase in discovery costs, as we just mentioned. Lawsuits and business or regulatory requirements sometimes result in these discovery requests, and the end result is that if you're dealing with PSTs, it may be completely undiscoverable in some cases. So that could expose the organization you're working with to legal or financial risks. Number three, inability to apply messaging retention policies. Now, if you're working with Exchange, you know that retention policies are interesting. They're useful. You can utilize them. You have to kind of get your head around how they work, but not with PSTs. You can't use them for retention policies. There's also a greater risk of data theft because messages that are stored in PST files, they're vulnerable, right? So PST is not the best way to go in that respect. And you have a fragmented view of messaging data. So what we mean by that is that the end users, they don't see their data at all times the same way. If they're on their desktop, they can see the PST. If they're looking through Outlook web app or perhaps looking at Outlook from another system, the PSTs are inaccessible. So there's all of these different problems with PSTs. This is the nightmare that we're talking about. So it's obvious we need to get rid of these things, right? So first of all, the biggest thing you're going to need to think about is how do you find these things, right? How do you locate your PSTs? Well, there's a couple of different ideas. For example, with Exchange 2013, you can use the mailbox import request to pull messages from a PST into an archive or a primary mailbox. That's great. Once you get your hand on them, you can pull the data out of them so that none of that data is lost. Now, you could put it in that personal archive. That would be better instead of putting it back into your primary mailbox, especially since if you are working with quotas, then the reason why your end user probably moved those emails into the PST is to avoid having the primary mailbox go off the charts in size. So it's up to you. You can make their mailboxes larger and then give them the room to move the PST over, or give them a personal archive to play with. Now, how do you find these PSTs? How do you locate them? Well, you know, the Exchange team released a PST capture tool that can be used to locate and import PSTs. Do I recommend the tool? Well, I guess it really depends on your needs. Let's discuss what the tool does, and then we can discuss some of the limitations. So first of all, there are three main aspects of the tool, three components. There's the PST Capture Central Service, which is really the heart of things, and this maintains the list of all PST files that are found in your organization. It manages the data as it's moved to the Exchange servers or to Exchange Online. Then you've got your PST Capture Agent. This is how PST files are discovered. These agents are installed on computers in your organization. Now, if you're shaking your head no and going, I'm not installing another agent, okay, hey, that's one of the limitations too. So we'll talk about that in a second. But this is just part of the components of the tool. And then you have the PST Capture Console, which is the interface that you use to configure your PST searches. You specify target mailboxes for PST files. You track the status and so forth. You get reporting. So these are the three main components of the tool. Does the tool work? It does. But here are the PST Capture tool limitations. Again, client software install. So every client has to have the agent. So that's something that with larger organizations may be an issue. No scanning of shares. So you can't scan network shares unless the file server is running Windows. So whether it's a NASBox or a NetApp file, filer, these types of devices, if it's running on anything like that, which it would in an organization of large size, you can't scan the shares. PST ownership is a problem, and there's two problems here. The first is that many PSTs show up in the results with the built-in /administrator as the owner. So a valid owner has to be manually selected from the global address list in order to work with this. The second is that you sometimes have orphaned PST files. So that's where there's no readily identifiable owner. And so that's the thing. PST Capture doesn't attempt to identify the owner. It doesn't work that way. So it's a very time-intensive thing to use the PST Capture tool in this regard. Sometimes you deal with locked PST files. Most users have PST files open in their Outlook profile, and PST Capture cannot process those files because Outlook has them locked in. So that puts a constraint on the PST migration. So users have to actually close down Outlook in order for you to access those PST files. And then there's a problem with PST deletion post-capture. So it imports PSTs, but they still remain in the user's profile. So in order to, it's great to capture them, but if you want to delete them, that's a separate manual process. And so if they're not deleted, end users may end up with PST content showing up in various places, several locations. So you can see that this is not necessarily the be-all and end-all of tools. It's a cute little tool. It does a good job, and we appreciate having it from the Exchange team, but it doesn't necessarily solve all of our problems. Okay, so we've discussed the problem as far as PSTs. We've discussed how to locate them using the built-in tool. That probably has your heart thinking, leaning towards, hey, is there another tool out there? Well, we'll get to that toward the end. But we mentioned the in-place archive, and it would be good just to give you a little bit of an education on what Microsoft offers with regard to in-place archive in Exchange 2013. Now, this personal archive mailbox is something that was released with 2010, We appreciate it. It's good for what it does. It tries to help you to get off of PSTs. Once you get that data and you capture it, regardless of the tool, you need to put the data somewhere. And so what are you going to do with it? Well, an archive mailbox, whether it's on-premise or cloud-based, it can be very helpful. They're typically static. That means lower disk I/O than production mailboxes. As a result, just like we discussed earlier when it comes to the cost of disk and how, sometimes you have this high-performance disk that you spent a great deal of money on. I've worked with some disk systems that cost more than a Porsche, and I worked with one that was more than a Ferrari, so that was pretty impressive. But the thing is that you're spending this kind of money, and now you have an archive mailbox that doesn't necessarily need all of that performance. So what can you do? With the in-place archive or any other type of on-premise archive, you can use cheaper disk. My thing is Microsoft has pushed that you can use cheaper disk for your mailbox, your production mailboxes as well, but again, that's a different debate. Now, one thing to note is with a hybrid deployment, you might keep your Exchange mailboxes local on-premise, but you might put your archive up in the cloud. So maybe you'll go with a hybrid, an Office 365 hybrid for something like that, or some other solution. So it's good to know that you have options and that there's flexibility here. But an archive mailbox is a smart move because regardless of how you have that mailbox, where you have it, and so forth, it's important to get off of those PSTs, to get rid of that nightmare first, and then make sure that your mail is discoverable. So if your email is moved to an archive mailbox, it's good that it can be discoverable. Now, with built-in Exchange 2013, there's in-place archiving, which does eliminate the need for PST files. And what's cool about it is it allows your end users to place their data in the archive and then access it through Outlook 2007 or later and through Outlook Web App. So you get that uniformity of being able to use that data no matter where you go, as opposed to PST files. Now, you'll note that you can't use ActiveSync for the archive, the in-place archive. Hopefully they're working on that for a future flavor. But currently you can still, if you have a web, mobile or tablet, you can access it through your Outlook web app. The archive mailbox is connected with the user's primary mailbox so that users have an alternate place to store historical messages, and they can move or copy messages between them. Now that's on the plus side. On the negative side, one of the problems with the in-place archive solution is that you don't necessarily have a way to lock users down without putting a legal hold on their mailbox and archive mailbox from deleting messages. And with regard to discovery, if you have to prove that messages were sent, you don't necessarily want end users to be able to delete those messages. And that oftentimes leads folks towards a third-party archive solution as well. So you need to be able to separate this idea in your mind. The in-place archive is not necessarily an enterprise-grade archive. Okay, it's a good solution. It gives users some flexibility. You can use it with Exchange. It's great for moving those PST files over once you capture them. But don't think of it necessarily as a perfect enterprise-grade archive, because end users, unless you put the mailbox on legal hold, can reach in there and grab that data, delete it. And so it makes it so that it really is, it eliminates the regulatory compliance side there. All right, moving forward with additional features in in-place archive, the archive database is the same as a regular database. So if you're working with Exchange 2013, you'll note that there is no distinction. You just create a regular database. And the archive database, it doesn't have to be in the same location as the primary mailbox database. So you can see from the last bullet there, it can be in the same database as the primary if you choose, the archive mailbox that is. But the archive, you can create a separate mailbox database that you use for archive, and you can put it on disks that are not high-performance disks. You can put it, as we mentioned, in Office 365. The other thing is you can maintain separate backup DAG solutions for each database. So there's a lot of flexibility here. All right, so hopefully you could see that this is all part of the flexibility. The only caveat here is that you have to make sure it's in the same Active Directory site. So no matter where you put this database, the archive database, whether it's another database in the same mailbox server or a completely separate mailbox server, it has to be the same site. All right, additional features let's talk about here. It's good to note that you can use quotas on archives as well. Some might say, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about, going with unlimited on the archive. Well, not necessarily. The idea is not necessarily to give folks unlimited data storage, that may not be within your company policy or possibility for your company in terms of storage costs. But you can perhaps give them a larger quota than you would give your primary mailbox database. So that's possible with in-place archiving. Archived messages are searchable, just like messages in your primary mailbox. They're both indexed. Although you can, through the Exchange Management Shell, you can use the Do Not Include Archive switch to kind of block that out. So some great features there with regard to in-place archiving, so long as, again, you keep in mind that it's not meant to be necessarily an enterprise-grade regulatory compliance solution. And then the point is that messages can be moved to the archive mailbox either manually or through inbox rules that the end user can set or retention policy rules. So, it's good to discuss the feature, but again, it's not necessarily enterprise grade. So it's good for you to know where the feature works for you, can help with your PST files, but if you're looking at regulatory compliance, you're going to look for third party. In fact, let's actually jump forward and let's talk about the value of third party solutions. Now, first of all, let's talk about PST locators, right? One of the real great things about third party PST locators is that they're more robust than the free tools, right? You heard the limitations of the PST capture tool. Nice tool. We appreciate having it. Thanks to the Exchange team. Good work. But obviously a third-party tool is going to give you a lot of the things that you don't have with regard to the free tools. As far as archiving, with on-premise archiving, when you're using that, IT has to worry about the storage side, as opposed to cloud-based solutions like Office 365, which take care of that for you. So the challenge really lies in moving your PST data to that destination. How do you do it? Another dilemma is deduplication of the PST data, especially during the import process. That can result in significant storage space reductions and lower costs. So third-party tools oftentimes can do that. And then there's the increased export functionality. Most third-party solutions do more than move data. They offer a way to filter content, to control what folder messages will be placed in, and allow options with regard to handling the original PST data. So it's really essential. Effective email management is vital to every business. And IT departments, Exchange admins, they need a practical strategy to handle this. Really make it something that's future-proof, affordable, something that's easy to implement, something that's easy to manage, has a predictable cost profile over many years, right? So there's a lot to think about with regard to the various aspects of PST management, getting folks off of PSTs completely. How are you going to do that? How are you going to locate the PSTs and get them moved? So with that in mind, what's really neat is that Sherpa did a great PST management survey, and you can see here in the infographic that companies were asked all sorts of questions with regard to how many PST files are you managing? How do you plan to discover PST data? And you can see the different results of that infographic here. What is the time scale for your PST project? Do you plan to delete PST data? And again, you can see all of the answers right here on the infographic. Now, the one thing that frustrates folks like me is that oftentimes when you ask people about their PST files and what they're going to do, what they want to do, a lot of times they give you the answer that is in their heart. It's what they want to do. But they get so overwhelmed when they start looking at the tools and they see what it's going to take for them to do it, that a lot of times it gets shoved to the side. But folks, I'm here to tell you this is not something you want to push aside. It's time now to start looking at your PST data, because moving forward, it's going to be essential that these are gone. These have to be gone in order to ensure regulatory compliance. You're going to need to make sure this data is discoverable. So you're going to have to choose a plan. You're going to have to move forward with it. You're going to have to look at migrating that data. And so at this point, you can just see the results here, but I'm going to turn things over to Rick. He's going to just evaluate some of these points with you and move you forward and show you a demonstration of tools that really will help with PST management. Rick, take it away.
Thanks, J. Peter. We appreciate those insights. So, folks, as evidenced by both our survey results that you see here and the amount of attendees we have at today's session, we believe that many organizations are still working on their strategy for managing PST files. And over the next several minutes, I'd like to show you how easy it can be to gain control over that PST data. By way of introduction, quickly, Sherpa Software offers a variety of products to move and manage unstructured data. We also offer a cloud-based information governance tool called a Tenderline. But today we're going to be focusing our attention on MailAttender, which is one of our on-premise products that delivers a complete set of content management tools for Microsoft Exchange. In addition to PST migrations, it's often used for enforcing retention policies, managing attachment content, or creating ad hoc reports. In today's demonstration, I'm going to show you how MailAttender can be used to move PST data into an Office 365 mailbox. And that process is going to take us through 4 steps. First, we're going to add the 365 and PST file connections into the MailAttender console. We're going to assign ownership to the PST files. This is one of the points J. Peter talked about during his part of the presentation. We'll show you how MailAttender can assist with that. We're going to set the transfer destination for that content, because each individual user who may own this information could have several content repositories. They might have a mailbox, they might have an archive, they might have a public folder, etc. And we need to pick that transfer destination where we're going to push the PST data. And then finally, walk through the process of building the transfer rule and show you the flexibility that's involved there. So now it's time for those 2 words that strike fear into the hearts of most architects, live demo. So we're going to try to initiate a session to a demonstration box. Okay, folks. So what we're looking at here is a server in our lab environment running the MailAttender console. This happens to be on Exchange, or on Server 2012. But the product can be installed on just about any Windows operating system. So I previously added connections to my email stores for my Office 365 account here. So you can see that my console is mapped to my Office 365 account, which in today's demonstration will be the recipient of the PST information to be imported. So we're going to go down here to the personal folder area, and I'm going to browse for some PST files to add into my migration scenario here. So we're going to select the PST subdirectory and scan down through, and you can see this process goes down recursively through the folders, either starting at the root of wherever this network file share may be, or perhaps at a different point on the network to scan for PST content and identify those PSTs for you. I might mention this particular scenario that we're working on today is for network-based PST files that might perhaps be on a file share. MailAttender also offers a desktop agent. So if you need to manage this type of content that's out on user machines, you can push our desktop agent out. Those desktops will then report back to MailAttender with the information about the local PSTs. The really interesting thing about that approach is that agent allows you to access PST files that are open in the Outlook profile, which is one of the things J. Peter cited as a problem. We've got code in our application that will allow us to access those PSTs concurrently while the users are using them. We also have code in there that will bypass any password protection that users have associated with the PST files. So all of our PST access is password protected. The desktop access also allows you that concurrent access. So now that we've identified these 2 PST files, we're going to take the first step in mapping them. So there's a couple of ways to do this. This is called PST ownership. We can scan PSTs for owners. This will open up the PST file, examine the content, and then try to map the PST content that's in the file back to a valid Active Directory owner. That process can take quite some time to run. So for today's demonstration, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go in Properties here and manually assign ownership. And I'm going to change this to an Office 365 account. And I might add, while this is verifying that that account exists, we're using my live Office 365 mailbox today. So not only are we doing a live demo, we're doing live demos into live mailboxes. So at this point, MailAttender is validating that Office 365 account, and it'll come back with that assignment for us. There we go. So now we're mapped to an owner in our Office 365 environment. So that's great, but I also mentioned that the second piece of this process is assigning a transfer destination, because in my particular case, I might have a mailbox, I may have an archive, I might have an Office 365. So we can select multiple PST files in our list here, and I'm using 2, but this could just as easily be 200 or 2000, and we're going to add a destination for the owner. So this is where we go in and make that association. You can see here the options that are available to us. Now, my Office 365 account does not have an archive attached to it, so we're going to use my mailbox. But if we're working in an archive scenario with the Exchange Archive, we would simply select this bottom radio button. And now we're going to name that destination, and we'll call it the Office 365 mailbox. Great. So now that plumbing is in place, and that process is generic, so that now, based on whoever owns this resource, when mail attender processes this PST, it'll look for that owner's information, in this case with regards to an Office 365 mailbox, and that's where these messages will be transferred into. So we have all of our linkages in place, as it were, to handle the transfer process. Now it's a matter of creating the rule to be able to do that. So we're going to open our rules console here. We just sort these down by category because I have a sample import rule available. I'm going to kind of walk through generally how these import rules stack out just so you have a basic understanding. We've given our rule a name and a category to just help organize it in the console. We're going to go in the email stores area here, and I'm going to remove these old connections from the last time I used this. And this is where we designate the source of the transfer. So in this case, it's going to be the PST files that we want to move data from. I'm going to go in and select some network-based PST files from my list, the two that we've been working with here. And we're going to add those as our source PST. So now when the mail attender rule runs, it's going to look into these two files and process the messages. Now this is great when you're using a handful of files, right? You can go in and individually select these. We also have a grouping mechanism so that if you have thousands of these PST files, you can effectively group them into manageable chunks. So very often when I'm working with import clients, they're doing that kind of a migration process for their PST in waves. That wave may be organized by perhaps a geographical office. We're going to do Chicago today, Pittsburgh next week, and New York the following week. It might be department. Today's sales. Next weekend we're going to do marketing, and the weekend after that production. But there are ways to handle bulk groups of these files rather than doing them individually. Because mail attender processes at the message level as opposed to the entire file level, there's a great deal of flexibility available to you when you create your migration scenario. So one of the things you can select, in fact, is what folders in the PST to process. We're going to look at all folders because these PSTs are fairly small. In the interest, again, of time today on today's demo, I just put a handful of messages into each one. But if you wanted a migration rule for just the inbox or the sent items, or perhaps you wanted to handle those differently, you could restrict the import by folder. You can also restrict the import on condition basis. So we can limit the messages that are going to be processed on a variety of criteria. And if I click the Add button here, you can see all of these categories are different types of condition categories that we can specify. So for example, if I wanted to do a message age, I could say I don't want to import any message that's more than 7 years old. So this is a great opportunity to begin to weed out some of that old data. And there's a variety of these conditions that you can specify during your migration. Finally, we're going to set the destination. So earlier we specified the Office 365 mailbox, and that's how I got this into the drop-down list. Very often in these scenarios, we want to control where the PST information is going to be placed in the user folder structure. So you don't necessarily want those PSTs going right into the inbox if they came from the inbox in the PST. You may want to specify where those PST messages are going to be placed. In my case, I've pre-pended my folder name, which would be inbox, sent items, deleted items, with a couple of qualifiers. So we're first going to create a folder called imported PST file. And then along with that, we're going to specify the name of the PST file. So this little variable that's enclosed in square brackets, this will get resolved at runtime. So in my case, if it was archive.pst or demo, in my case it's demo1.pst and demo2.pst, we'll create folders in the mail store with those messages. So the user will clearly be able to map what's now in their mailbox to what was in their PST file originally and help find that information. J. Peter mentioned the fact that deduplication can save you a lot of time and effort when you transfer the information. Again, because we're transferring at the message level, we can check for duplicates. So as you move a pool of PST data for a user, we'll first pull over the messages for those PST files. We'll hash those messages to create a unique hash for each one. And then we will deduplicate any that have identical hashes so that we can move just the data that's original into your destination and not worry about duplicates of that. And then finally, you've got a lot of options with regards to what happens to the original message. As I move it from the PST file, what do we want to do with it? Now, very often that's a delete, so we just want it to be gone from the PST file after we move it. But if you're a little bit risk adverse, that's not a problem. We provide messages to delete it and put it in a deleted items folder, and we can even use the Exchange recoverable items folder. So in my case, I use the nothing, leave the original message alone, because I very often recycle these PSTs for future demos. So those are the settings for the rule, and then you would typically schedule this to run on a frequency basis. Maybe we're going to run this weekend at 2 o'clock on Saturday morning, something like that, to schedule the import. That's my import rule. Before I kick that off, I just want to show you quickly. We're going to log in to the Office 365 mailbox here. And I want to prove to you that those folders do not exist in my data store. So what we're looking for in the folder list on the left here is indeed a folder that says imported PST data. And you'll see that does not currently exist in my Office 365 folder count. So just a little validation there. We're going to go ahead and minimize this for the moment. Go to our PST import rule here, and we're going to kick this off. So I'm going to set this to process immediately. I'm also going to pop up a background window. This is a little service monitoring window that comes with the product that just allows us to keep an eye on the migration process as it occurs. So in this case, we should see a couple of activities take place. It should go through, select the PST messages. There we go. It's processing those PST messages. It's pulling them into a common area, and then it will ultimately transfer those up to Office 365. While that's in progress, I want to point out two other things that are very useful in these kinds of projects. The first one is that we can use MailAttender to gather statistics. So if you've got a variety of PST files and you're not sure how much content there is or how old that content is or perhaps where it is in the folder list, you can turn on statistics. And again, I'm going to show you one for the mailbox here just because it's got a lot of representative data. And we'll gather information about the PST or the mailbox, actually any Exchange data store, and allow you to kind of assess it. So over time, starting with last May up through October here, here is sort of the performance of this particular mailbox, the inbox count, inbox size, and you can get a very nice idea of how the mailbox is performing. And you can also look at that content at the message level in aggregate or the attachment level in aggregate. So this goes through for all of the mapping information, and it shows you how the messages are being tracked within the message store, how old they are, how many of them there are, and so forth. And it looks like we've got a little bit of a delay going on here. But that's the way the message statistics work. Now, there we go. It popped up for us. So this is our message counts by age, by size, by type, and so forth. So you can kind of see how the message information is tracking. The same kind of thing is true for attachments. The other thing that is often very helpful is MailAttender can generate ad hoc reports for you. So in this case, I've got a PST report rule that will go through the PST files, and it will create a summary of the information that's in the PSTs. Let me just run that quickly for you so you can see what that looks like. And we'll kick that off. So ad hoc reports are available in the product. You can format them to find any kind of information content about the PSTs that are being processed. In this case, you might want to use it. I often recommend that our customers use this as sort of an audit process. So you can go into the PST file. You can create a report that shows you all of the folders, the number of items that's in each folder, and perhaps even the size of items in each folder. So it gives you a kind of a before and after view of what's happened within that mailbox. You can see here, Office 365 rule is running. and it's accessing my mailbox to move the data up. Let's see if we happen to get a report generated here. Looks like that's stuck in a queue. So here's one we canned from yesterday, but you can see the folders are blank here because I had removed that PST and re-added it. But here's the mail store, rather, PST. But here's the delete items folder, the count of items, the total size of items. So you can use these reports to help you characterize the amount of information and formalize your policy. Looks like our migration is in process here. Let's start if we can get a list of back to the mailbox view here, and it has not quite hit yet. Appears to be a bit of a slowdown accessing an Office 365 environment. Not a big surprise. We run into that occasionally. Office 365 tends to be a little bit more volume sensitive in terms of content and so forth as we're moving data, but it's been a very popular feature among our customers to be able to move data in and out of the Office 365 environment along with their on-premise mailboxes. And you can see in our Exchange console here all of the various things that we support. So we have the new, what they call modern style public folders that we can manipulate data in. We've got the archive in the mailbox in Office 365. These archives would be on-premise versions of the Exchange 2010 or 2013 archive. And then we also, of course, have mailboxes and the PST files that are either on the network file shares or on the desktops. And there's a list of various desktops for data. Let's go back here. It looks like our roll finished. And we'll see if we can get a refresh. There's our imported PST file. Probably still parsing messages up, but you can see that it has created the folder share for me here in my Office 365 account, and it's probably just cached, so we're not getting a complete refresh of that yet. As a matter of fact, let's try a log out and log back in again just to see if that forces it. Helps if you put the right password in. Let's see. Well, little connection problem, folks. So I think I've given you enough of an idea how the process works, and ultimately the messages would show up there for us in Office 365. So we're going to bounce back now to our presentation. And Roger, we'll turn it over to you so that we can handle questions and talk about what next steps are.
Thanks, Rick. And I'll just remind everyone, if you have any questions, please use the questions panel at the bottom of the control section to send us any. We have received a few, Rick, that we'll go ahead and take, starting with, when migrating PST content, how do you recommend handling deduplication? Deduplication. Say that fast 3 times.
Yeah, indeed. So I think we talked a little bit about this during the course of our import process. This is a difficult problem because PST files are so easy to add data into, users dragging and dropping. They very often have multiple versions of the same content in more than one PST file. So originally we didn't support deduplication, and we found through live implementations that there were a lot of duplicate messages. So we've added that feature to make it very easy for administrators to just basically click a checkbox, and we'll handle that in our product for them automatically.
Great. Next question. Does Microsoft's free PST capture tool support network-based PST files?
J. Peter, perhaps you can weigh in on that. I'm not as familiar with PST capture.
Right. So I guess it just depends on the type of as far as where these PST files are located, because there is a problem when it comes to if it's on a network share. If the file server is running Windows, then it is possible to scan that share to locate the network share and locate the PST file, but it's not the case, if it's not on a Windows box, as we mentioned, whether it's a NAS box, a NetApp file, or so forth, well then it's not possible to scan for it.
Great, thanks, J. Peter. Next question is, if I move my PST data back into Exchange, how do I deal with the files that are still on user desktops?
Yeah, great point, Roger. So from our perspective, from Sherpa's perspective in Mail Attender, we've also added functionality to that rules architecture that I showed you about that allows an administrator to either disconnect the PST file from a user's Outlook profile and or physically delete the PST file from the user's hard drive. So we've provided a couple of options for dealing with that particular scenario.
Excellent. Okay, we're still getting questions. I think we have time to take a few more. Next question is, does the tool disconnect PST files on user desktops once they are processed?
Yep. So we talked a little bit about this on the last question. It does not automatically. However, there is, it does not as part of the import process, I should specify. However, we do have a separate rule action that will allow you to go through and create a rule to do that. So our experience has been that very often administrators don't want to do that until they know the migration's been successful, or perhaps they've audited to make sure that the message count's complete and so forth. So there is a facility to handle that, but it's not, they have to request Mail Attender perform that function for them.
Okay, very good. Next question is, after PST is exported to Office 365, does the user mailbox size need to be increased, I believe, is the question.
Yeah, so ultimately, the answer to that is yes. I mean, we're pumping more data into that Office 365 mailbox, and I don't know what the restrictions are that Microsoft makes with regards to the limit there. I think it probably varies by edition of Office 365.
Okay, good. We're continuing to get questions in. Are you good with taking a few more, Rick?
Sure.
Next one is, can you limit the amount of PST file data to be processed?
Right. So there's a couple of ways to do this. So we can, it depends on what you mean by limit. We can certainly limit PST data by criteria. So if you, as I mentioned, we're going through the demonstration, if you only want messages that are newer than 5 years, or you don't want anything older than 7 years, that sort of thing, that's one way of limiting it. Another way to look at that procedure of limiting is to maybe throttle traffic so that you're not trying to push too much information too fast over the network. And we do have options when customers are using the desktop side of our product to throttle traffic that they can specify. So you've got a couple of different strategies available for that kind of a management oversight.
Good, and there was actually a second part to this that might help. So the second part was, can you process 50 gigabytes within a 24-hour window, then process the next batch in the next 24 hours? So they're looking at a time factor.
Good question. We do not have a volume-based limiting factor today. Probably a good future feature request.
Great. Next question is, how is? Oh, sorry. I've got quite a few coming in here, so I'm trying to keep them in order here. Let's see, we've got okay. So there's a question about, there's a couple questions, so I'll just kind of summarize them. Can you talk about the Sherpa cloud-based tools with regards to how they manage PST content?
Yes, we can. We certainly can. I mean, I think we've talked a lot about this during the course of the demonstration, but essentially the idea is to provide you tools to process the PST content at the message level. I think that's our big differentiator here, right? So we can limit, interrogate, or filter content at the message level as we go along. And Roger, I don't want to interrupt you for just a moment from the questions. I brought up my desktop just to kind of complete our demo. My desktop view of Outlook, and you can see here that my demo PSTs are in our imported PST file. and I finally did get the recached view to work there. So a little belated completion of the demonstration part of the project, but you can see that mail tender successfully reached that Office 365 mailbox. So I thought.
Hey Rick, this is J. Peter. I'm so glad you did that because you know, I'm looking, and as you did it, I'm like, oh, don't give up, keep going. I know this thing's going to work if you just get back in. I'm so glad you. What a good way to end things off, you know, because the tool's fantastic. You know, it's great for folks to be able to see that everything works just like you said it does, and that's a win. Very good.
Yeah, the hazards of live demos, but you know, what we learn from them makes us stronger, right? Yeah.
Great. Well, good. And we do have a couple other questions. We're going to have to wrap up here shortly. But again, I'll summarize a couple of the questions that we got, Rick, for you in terms of,
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about how mail attender is sold? And there's a question about whether there is any way to test it before actually purchasing.
The answer to both of them, well, the second question, the answer is yes. We do have evaluation software, and you can see on the slide that happens to be on the screen right now, we've got a shortened URL that will take you to the mail attender information page in Sherpa's website, and there's a download link pretty prominently displayed there that'll let you access the evaluation software, which, by the way, is a great way to sort of assess your PST migration needs, because the evaluation software will let you gather information about those PSTs, how many of them are there if you install the desktops or perform a scan, what's the size of them in terms of total disk size and so forth. So that can be very useful. The product's typically sold by repository that we're going to address. So, you know, part of that would be the number of PSTs you want to migrate, and the second half would be the number of destinations you want to push them into, mailboxes or archives, for example. So important point, those licenses are reassignable. So if you've got 5,000 users and you only want to migrate 1,000 of them, or you want to do 1,000 this year and maybe next month you're going to do another 1,000, you could certainly recycle those licenses if you wish to do that.
Okay, very good. Let's see. We're continuing to get lots of questions, and I'm going to apologize because we're not going to be able to get to everyone's questions, but I encourage everyone to follow up with the Sherpa representative, who will be reaching out to all of you with your specific question for those of you that we weren't able to get to on today's call. So we're going to have to go ahead and wrap up, and on behalf of msexchange.org, I want to thank J. Peter and Rick and all of you for participating today. We also want to thank, of course, Sherpa Software for making it possible for us to provide today's event. The recording of today's presentation will be available on the msexchange.org site very soon, and please watch your email for upcoming msexchange.org webinars as well. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you all for attending, and you may now disconnect.